There are some new questions being raised about Michigan's sex offender registry, with some people asking if is it too burdensome on some people who are on that list.
Recently, a federal judge ruled that part of Michigan's sex offender law is unconstitutional. Specifically, the judge said the 1,000-foot school safety zone can be tough for offenders to follow because they have to guess where the zones are. He also struck down some of the other parts of the law, including requiring offenders to report new email and instant message addresses in person.
Also yesterday, a story in the Detroit Free Press focused on Michigan's sex offender registry laws, asking if they really do keep us safer or perhaps put a burden on some people who it shouldn't. Joining us now, State Senator Rick Jones and J.J. Prescott, a professor at University of Michigan's law school who's done extensive research on sex offender registries. Professor, we'll start with you. What does your research show?
Well, most of my research is focused on the effects of these laws on crime and whether or not they reduce recidivist crime. And my research has shown really, as has most of the other research in this area, that there really isn't any effect on crime, at least among those who are convicted recidivists.
Does this, no, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to focus on the distinction between private registries, where the police have this information and they can follow up on people, check in on them occasionally. That seems to be more effective than using the public to try to deter people from engaging in crime.
So that is what you think we should have in Michigan, is more of a private system instead of a public registry. Is that right?
At least that's likely to be more effective.
Let me talk to you, State Senator Rick Jones. Now, you are not a fan of that, right? You would like to keep the registry the way it is right now, and if that's the case, why?
Well, the registry right now does have a police section, Tier 1. Tier 2 and 3 are the public sections, and I think we want to keep them public so people can protect their children.
Well, I think what the professor is saying, correct me if I'm wrong here, Professor, but the recidivism isn't affected by this. And in fact, I believe I saw some of the research that you did shows that actually some offenders are not deterred in the least by these public lists.
Right. In fact, it even cuts the other way. So, I mean, it makes sense. It's a common sense element that if we sort of let people know who is likely to reoffend, that people will keep an eye on them, monitor them, maybe steer clear of them. But in fact, if somebody is actually likely to reoffend, the kinds of monitoring that's going to happen isn't going to be very effective. And what's worse is when somebody doesn't have a job, can't find stable housing, can't build a social network, make friends, find somebody to fall in love with and get married, turns out they're a lot more likely to return to crime. So if you put them on these lists, it makes them more likely to become to return to crime rather than less likely.
Senator Jones, what do you have to say about that?
31 years of law enforcement, and I can tell you that a pedophile doesn't change. Science has not found a cure. I want these lists public. I want the public protected.
I wanted to ask you about this. You just said something, a pedophile doesn't change, and I've always wondered when it comes to these sex offender registries, when you are dealing with the most violent of criminals, if we believe that the recidivism rate is so high, is that not something we should be considering in sentencing, and should these violent offenders not be sent away for longer to keep them off the streets?
No, absolutely. I believe it's society's duty to keep certain offenders away from society, perhaps forever. But I can't control what a lot of the liberal judges do.
Now, Senator, let me ask you another part of that. You talk about the pedophiles cannot be changed. What about people who are on the sex offender list who are not pedophiles? Public urination can get you on the list. Mooning somebody from a bus can get you on the list. And these are not sex offenders. They're just people who made a bad choice. And yet, is it possible their lives are getting ruined by this list?
Well, sir, I'm sorry, but you're wrong. And so was the Detroit paper. Public urination does not get you on the list. I took care of that in 2011 when I rewrote this law, brought us into compliance with the Adam Walsh Federal Child Protection Act. Used to be 3 convictions of public urination would get you on the list. That no longer is the case. The newspaper had it wrong. I've been talking to that reporter several times today, and they're going to do a retraction.
I'm glad you could clear that up. You know, we have also heard people say,
yes,
with concerns with a list, that it's, let's say there's consensual sex with a 17-year-old and a 16-year-old. Those people would be on the list then. Is it fair that they're penalized for the rest of their life? And is that the case?
That is not the case. The age of consent in Michigan is 16. So typically what happens is known as the Romeo and Juliet problem. 17-year-old boyfriend, 15-year-old girlfriend. They used to go on the list for 25 years. I don't agree with that. I took care of that in 2011. In fact, right now, I'm drafting legislation that would allow that to be expunged with 2 years of good behavior. And we're talking consensual act, no force, no coercion, no drugs and alcohol.
Professor Prescott, back to you again. Is there anything you see in the registry as it exists that is useful? I mean, obviously you've talked about the private aspect of it. Is there anything useful in a public registry that you can see that ought to be kept or modified?
Sure, I don't disagree with the senator that there are certain individuals out there, that aren't going to be responsive to treatment. But that class is actually a lot smaller than who we're currently listing. I mean, we have the 4th largest registry in the country. And, I mean, there are plenty of people on there who pose no risk that, if you had them work with people who actually understand sex crime, they really don't pose a risk. And so, I mean, I don't see any gain from including those. In fact, I think there's a big loss. And the loss comes from the fact that we only have so many criminal justice dollars. And if we're spending a lot of time watching people who are unlikely to offend, we can't be solving other crimes.
Well, we're going to have to leave the discussion there. We thank you very much, State Senator Rick Jones and J.J. Prescott, for both of you weighing in on this very important issue this afternoon.
Thank you.
And still